1 year later, this wasn't supposed to still be burning. Hollywood legal fights usually flare up, dominate headlines for a few weeks, then quietly disappear behind closed doors. But this one refused to cool down. Instead, it kept growing. More filings, more money, more damage, and more questions that no one seems willing to answer publicly. What started as vague tension between two co-stars on a wildly successful film slowly transformed into a legal war that now threatens careers, reputations, and nine-figure fortunes. Blake Lively, one of Hollywood's most carefully managed public figures, made a move that shocked the industry. Justin Baldoni, known for his clean image and inspirational brand, didn't retreat. He struck back harder than anyone expected. And here's what makes this case different. It's not just about what allegedly happened on set. It's about power, image control, and who gets to define the story when the cameras turn off. A year later, with a trial looming and neither side backing down, this isn't fading away. It's heading straight for its most explosive chapter yet. On the surface, everything looked like a win. It Ends With Us didn't just meet expectations, it crushed them. The film pulled in hundreds of millions worldwide, instantly becoming one of the most talked-about romantic dramas of the year. Studio executives were celebrating, fans were praising the adaptation, and the cast was being positioned for victory lap interviews. But as the press tour rolled on, something felt off. Viewers began noticing small details that didn't line up with the film's success. Joint appearances were limited. Interviews felt stiff. Moments that should have been playful came across as awkward. Online, fans started connecting dots, asking why the two leads rarely appeared comfortable together, or why their energy felt completely different from what the movie was selling. At first, it was brushed off as scheduling conflicts or overblown internet theories. After all, Hollywood rumors start every day and usually go nowhere. But the whispers didn't fade, they multiplied. Clips were dissected. Body language was analyzed. Silence became louder than any statement. And just when it seemed like the speculation would eventually die down, the rumors stopped being speculation at all. That shift happened quietly, almost without warning. In December, Blake Lively made a move that instantly changed the direction of the story. Instead of addressing rumors through interviews or carefully worded statements, she went straight to a formal complaint, filing with the California Civil Rights Department. What had once been internet chatter was now a legal matter. In the filing, Lively alleged misconduct and retaliation connected to the production of It Ends With Us. The claims were serious, and they weren't limited to just one person. Multiple individuals and entities tied to the film were named, signaling that this wasn't being framed as a single misunderstanding, but as a broader pattern, at least from her side of the story. The details themselves were largely kept out of public view, but the message was unmistakable. This was no longer something she intended to handle quietly. What stood out most was the timing and the scale. Hollywood insiders noted that complaints like this are often the first step towards something much bigger, and Lively's decision suggested she was preparing for a long fight, not a quick resolution. It also put everyone else involved in a defensive position overnight. And while many assumed this would pressure the other side into backing off, the response that followed would shock nearly everyone watching from the outside. Instead of retreating, the response came fast, and it came swinging. On the very same day Blake Lively escalated her claims into a formal federal lawsuit, Justin Baldoni launched a counterstrike that stunned Hollywood. Not a quiet denial, not a measured pushback, a $400 million lawsuit that instantly reframed the entire battle. Baldoni's filing accused Lively and those closest to her of running what his legal team described as a coordinated effort to damage his reputation. The suit didn't stop with her name alone. It pulled in Ryan Reynolds, publicists, and others, turning a two-person dispute into an all-out legal war. Overnight, the narrative shifted from a single set of allegations to a clash of competing realities. Industry insiders were quick to point out how rare a move like this is. Countering claims of misconduct with a lawsuit that massive isn't just about money. It's about leverage, public perception, and sending a message that there would be no quiet exit. Baldoni's side framed the situation as exaggerated grievances, insisting that any issues had already been addressed during production and never warranted a courtroom battle. Suddenly, the question wasn't just who was telling the truth. It was whether this case was about accountability, or about who could control the story before a jury ever heard it. And just when it seemed like the fight had reached its peak, the court stepped in and shifted the ground beneath both sides. For a moment, it looked like the momentum had finally swung. Months into the back and forth, a judge stepped in and dismissed Justin Baldoni's massive countersuit, instantly changing the temperature of the case. Headlines framed it as a turning point, and online, many assumed this was a clear win for Blake Lively. But in reality, it was far more complicated. Legal experts were quick to explain that a dismissal like this doesn't mean the underlying conflict disappears. It simply means the court wasn't willing to let that specific claim move forward in its current form. The central accusations on both sides were still very much alive, still unresolved, and still headed toward a reckoning. Behind the scenes, neither camp showed signs of backing off. If anything, the ruling hardened positions. Filings became more aggressive. Arguments grew sharper. Each side accused the other of twisting facts, mischaracterizing events, and selectively presenting evidence. The tone shifted from defensive to combative. What made things even more chaotic was how little of the evidence the public could actually see. Key documents were heavily redacted, leaving observers piecing together fragments and speculation. To outsiders, it felt like reading two completely different stories about the same events, stories that couldn't possibly both be true. And as the legal whiplash continued, one thing became clear: this wasn't slowing down. In fact, it was about to get even more intense. By this point, most Hollywood lawsuits would have lost steam. Lawyers would be negotiating quietly, headlines would dry up, and the public would move on. That didn't happen here. Instead, this case exploded into something unusually aggressive and relentless. In just over a year, the docket filled with more than 1,000 entries, an eye-opening number for a case that was still relatively young. Motions, objections, responses, and counter-responses piled up at a pace that even seasoned legal watchers found extreme. Every detail was fought over. Nothing was simple. Nothing was left uncontested. Much of the battle centered on discovery, the phase where each side demands documents, messages, and records from the other. According to legal experts watching the case, this is often where pressure builds, because it's where private communications and behind-the-scenes decisions can come into play. But here, large portions of those materials were sealed or redacted, adding another layer of frustration and mystery. What stood out most wasn't just the volume, it was the intensity. This didn't feel like a dispute headed toward compromise. It felt like two sides preparing for something much bigger. Observers began noting that money alone couldn't explain the persistence. Reputation, credibility, and long-term career survival appeared to be driving the strategy. And as the filings kept coming, a difficult truth started to settle in. This case wasn't being built for a quiet ending. It was being built for a courtroom showdown. At this stage, the path forward became hard to ignore. Despite the mountain of paperwork and endless legal arguments, the core problem remained untouched. The two sides were telling completely different versions of the same story, and neither showed any willingness to bend. Legal experts pointed out that this is exactly the kind of case judges are reluctant to decide on their own. When facts are disputed this deeply, especially in situations that hinge on intent, context, and credibility, courts tend to step back. A judge isn't there to decide who sounds more believable on paper. That's a job reserved for a jury. Efforts to end the case through summary judgment only reinforced that reality. The filings read like parallel universes, with each side insisting the facts were clear and the other side was distorting reality. From the outside, it looked less like a legal disagreement and more like two incompatible narratives colliding head-on. What made things even more complicated was how much evidence remained hidden. With key materials redacted, it became nearly impossible for anyone outside the courtroom to gauge how damaging, or how defensible, the claims truly were. That uncertainty only strengthened the argument for a full trial, where testimony, cross-examination, and credibility would finally be tested in public. By now, the question wasn't whether this case could go to trial. It was whether there was any realistic way left to avoid one. Despite the looming trial, the court still pushed both sides toward a possible settlement. Judges often encouraged this, hoping to save time, money, and public spectacle. A settlement would have offered a clean break, or at least a carefully negotiated compromise. But in this case, few believed it would happen. Lawyers hinted at potential deals, but insiders saw the real obstacle: pride, and image. Both Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni have meticulously managed careers, and neither seemed willing to risk leaving the narrative or the headlines in the other's hands. Every statement, every motion, every filing was as much about controlling public perception as it was about legal strategy. Even the language of the potential settlement was telling. In Hollywood, these agreements rarely include apologies. They focus on carefully phrased acknowledgments, vague expressions of moving forward, and agreed-upon facts that keep both parties looking clean. But in a case fueled by emotion, reputation, and unresolved tension, that kind of compromise felt almost impossible. Experts watching from the outside noted that settlement talks in cases like this are rarely genuine. They're often a formality, a legal box to check before the real drama begins. For these two, a deal would mean conceding some control over the story, and neither seemed willing to do that. And so, with settlement talks scheduled but unlikely to succeed, the countdown to trial continued, and the stakes only grew higher. With the trial date finally set, the stage is officially set for the most dramatic chapter yet. Jury selection is scheduled to begin in April, with the trial itself expected to last about a month. Every filing, every motion, every public statement has been leading to this moment, and now the world will finally get a front-row seat to the clash that's been simmering for over a year. For Blake Lively, the outcome could determine not just financial compensation, but the trajectory of her career and the perception of her personal brand. For Justin Baldoni, the stakes are equally high. His reputation, professional opportunities, and public image are all on the line. This isn't just a courtroom battle. It's a contest over narrative control in a world that watches every move. Even the smallest developments could have ripple effects. Redacted documents may finally see the light of day. Testimonies could reveal previously unknown conflicts or intentions. And the jury's interpretation of credibility will be critical, because in a case this tangled, the verdict will hinge on who they believe and why. One thing is certain: whether the trial ends with a dramatic verdict, a last-minute settlement, or a drawn-out legal maneuvering, neither side will emerge unscathed. The headlines will continue, reputations will be scrutinized, and the story of this high-profile Hollywood feud will be dissected for years to come. In the end, this legal war is about more than money or contracts. It's about truth, perception, and the lengths people will go to protect both in the glittering but ruthless world of Hollywood.